Is Spain now a no-go zone for British holidaymakers? Anti-tourism protesters in Spain have emerged in recent years as a significant response to the rapid growth of mass tourism. As the tourism sector boomed over the past decade, local residents began to voice their frustrations over the profound changes this influx of visitors brought to their neighbourhoods. Locals are now demanding government action to crack down on the approximately 80 million visitors who travel to the country every year. Activists have even organised regular marches and demonstrations, with those in attendance issuing chants such as "Tourists, go home and you're not welcome here." One protest even saw British sunbathers on a beach targeted, with activists descending onto the sand to demand the tourists leave the country. GB News chatted to Brian Harrison, leading an anti-tourism campaign. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
Salva La Tejita, which I'm a member of the association, is one of 70 organisations who have organised these protests, and not one of these organisations is against tourism. The only thing we need to stress is that tourism needs to be regulated. An island is a limited territory, and at the moment, the water supply is running out because of over-tourism. The sewage treatment is saturated. The roads are gridlocked. There's just no more space. In addition, because of the availability of tourists to come in and restrict it, a lot of constructors are building on the last parts of land available, which are protected areas, which is what actually triggered the first protest in April, which was in the capital of each island.
Hang on, Brian, sorry to interject, but we've looked a lot at maps of Tenerife on this channel. One of the things that I noticed, actually, is that the vast majority of the island is not developed. I mean, there's miles and miles and miles of sort of fairly arid landscape. Surely it would be beneficial to the island to have tourists come, pay their tax, contribute to the local economy, and then more infrastructure could be built thanks to all that flood of money.
First of all, a lot of these areas you see, they're huge valleys and they're huge ravines. There's no way you can construct anywhere near these. All the available land, which was previously authorised to construct on, that's all been built on. So what the local governments are doing, they're trying to convert from protected land, where there's protected endemic flora and fauna, at risk of extinction, and they're trying to authorise building on these areas. Now, there's already huge amounts of hotels and tourist areas. There's massive amounts. It'd be impossible to fill all these hotels. There's also a lot of buildings which need renovation. They're empty. Why not renovate these buildings instead of encroaching upon protected area?
How do you think the balance should be struck here? Because a lot of the economy of Tenerife relies on visitors coming and using the hotels, the restaurants, the beaches, the resorts, etc. But you say there's a huge amount of tension there. People aren't seeing the benefits of the tourism, the mass tourism. So how do you strike a balance without losing all of that money? You don't want to push away tourists who are spending money and keeping the economy going. All
of the studies by universities around the world and different institutions indicate that in general, if the Canary Islands reduce tourism by approximately 30%, then it would fall into the bracket of being sustainable. Now, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when it was at that level, the tourism was still bringing in revenue. But the island is a lot better off, because another aspect is that in Spain as a whole, over 90% of holiday rentals aren't legal. They're not certified. They're not registered. Many of these properties have been bought up by people from different countries who are using platforms such as Booking, Airbnb, and they're not paying any tax in Spain at all. The money's not arriving at the island. There's absolutely no regulation. This is something which needs to be addressed.
Anti-tourism protests have emerged prominently in cities heavily affected by mass tourism. Barcelona, Majorca, and the Canary Islands, which are travelled to by hundreds of thousands of tourists each year, have all seen the most vocal demonstrations. In Barcelona, residents have voiced concerns about the impact of tourism on local life, citing rising rents, overcrowded streets, and the erosion of cultural identity. While the influx of visitors has led to significant changes in neighbourhoods, pushing out long-term residents and altering the social fabric. Protests have included marches and organised gatherings where locals express their frustration over the prioritisation of tourist interests over community needs. In Majorca, local activists have rallied against the excessive development of tourist facilities and the environmental degradation caused by tourism. The island's infrastructure struggles to cope with the high volume of visitors, leading to increased traffic, waste and pressure on natural resources. Residents argue for sustainable tourism practices and seek to preserve their local environment and way of life. Meanwhile, in the Canary Islands, Tenerife and Gran Canaria, they've been the most obvious focal point for anti-tourism protests. Environmental issues are central to these protests, as activists highlight the negative effects of tourism on biodiversity and natural landscapes. For instance, concerns over water shortages and waste management have prompted calls for more responsible tourism that prioritises environmental sustainability. Many locals advocate for a tourism model that benefits residents rather than just visiting tourists, pushing for policies that limit tourist numbers and promote eco-friendly practices. The Spanish government has responded to anti-tourism protests with a mixture of measures. Ministers and local government officials are attempting to carefully manage the tricky balancing act of addressing local concerns while maintaining the economic benefits of tourism. Many local governments have implemented regulations to manage tourist numbers, such as limiting short-term rentals like those listed on Airbnb and imposing taxes on tourist accommodations. The government has also begun promoting sustainable tourism practices, focusing on preserving local cultures and environments. Initiatives include encouraging off-season travel and developing rural tourism to distribute visitors more evenly across the country. Authorities are also engaging with local communities through public consultations and forums to better understand their needs and concerns. So, is it still safe to go to Spain, or should you be cancelling your holiday? Well, the UK Foreign Office advises travellers to Spain to remain informed about potential disruptions caused by ongoing anti-tourism protests. Brits on holiday are urged to exercise caution, especially in areas where protests are planned or underway, as demonstrations can escalate unpredictably. The Foreign Office recommends staying updated through local news sources and following advice from local authorities. And tourists should also consider avoiding known protest sites to ensure their safety and minimise inconvenience during their travels. Now, while these protests are generally peaceful, the intensity of feelings regarding tourism-related issues means that travellers might encounter vocal opposition or demonstrations during their visit. The advice includes being respectful of local sentiments and understanding the context behind the protests. In short, the government is not suggesting anyone needs to cancel their holiday to Spain at this time. For the most current and detailed advice, though, you should always check the gov.uk website or the relevant embassy's travel advisory page before planning your trip. Naturally, despite the Foreign Office advice, there will be those who feel uncomfortable travelling and may want to cancel their holiday. Sadly, though, your insurance is unlikely to cover any such change of plans. Whether your travel insurance covers cancellation due to feeling unsafe depends on the specific terms of your policy. But generally, most travel insurance policies require a legitimate reason for cancellation, such as illness, injury, or a specific event that significantly impacts safety. It's crucial to review your insurance policy cancellation and disruption sections and check if it includes coverage for fear of travel due to safety issues. Additionally, contacting your insurance provider directly can clarify your options. Often, travel insurance companies will be unwilling to pay out if the official government advice does not advise changing plans. Now, the good news is there remain several places in Spain where tourism-related tensions are less pronounced and Britons can book holidays without having to worry about widespread protests. The Spanish government has even launched campaigns to promote lesser-known destinations in Spain, encouraging tourists to explore regions beyond popular hotspots. The historic city Santiago de Compostela, famous for its pilgrimage routes, generally maintains a respectful relationship with tourists. So too does Granada, which offers a rich cultural experience that many locals appreciate. Although it has a growing tourism sector, Valencia tends to have a more balanced approach, with many locals embracing tourists while still advocating for sustainability. Meanwhile, Bilbao has not experienced significant anti-tourism protests. Known for its culture and architecture, the city has developed its tourism in a way that integrates well with local life. It's worth noting that Spain is far from the only location to have seen anti-tourism protests prop up. In Italy, cities like Venice and Florence have witnessed significant pushback against the overwhelming influx of tourists. And in Thailand, particularly in places like Phuket and Chiang Mai, Locals have voiced concerns about cultural erosion and environmental degradation caused by mass tourism. Meanwhile, protests have also erupted in Iceland as the country grapples with the effects of a booming tourist industry on its fragile landscapes. In the years to come, governments across the globe are likely to have to grapple with how to appease locals who are fed up with mass tourism while making sure their economies are not adversely impacted.